Welcome back. It's 12 minutes past 9, and we're going to shift our attention to the shifting sands of international diplomacy in a move that some are calling historic and others simply a hollow political theater. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer has announced that the United Kingdom will recognize the state of Palestine by September unless Israel shows concrete steps toward peace in Gaza. It's the latest Western ripple in what's becoming a somewhat global tidal wave of pressure on Israel as conditions in Gaza continue to worsen and accusations of a genocide that we are all, I think, at this point can agree that it is happening. It's no longer a matter of there being plausible evidence. It's right there in front of the world to see continue to mount. But is this really a moment as meaningful as it may sound, or is it merely a carefully timed announcement ahead of the United Nations General Assembly to help us separate the symbolism from substance? I'm joined now by Dr. Abdul Wahid. He's a UK-based political commentator who's been closely following the Labour government's evolving stance on Palestine. Dr. Wahid, good morning to you. Thank you so much for joining us. Let's start with the basics. Is the UK's announcement, Keir Starmer's announcement, just a moral gesture, or do you see this as a real pivot in policy with consequences for Israel and just the broader conflict or war against Gaza?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Thank you for having me, Salelo. I don't see this as a major historic event. I don't see this as a big pivot in UK policy. UK has supported the two-state solution, as they call it, for a very long time. Mr. Starmer has growing disquiet in his own party about the fact that he and his government have not just tolerated the genocide, but they've been actively supporting it and been called out on it. They're very out of step with the rest of the UK public, which is increasingly disturbed by the fact that their country does nothing to sanction the Zionist entity. And the reason we can know this is really not a substantial change is the fact that those actions that the UK takes that supports Israel, the Zionist occupation of Palestine that is called Israel, the actions the UK takes in terms of trade, in terms of military cooperation, in terms of intelligence gathering, in terms of relationships with politicians and diplomats, they are all continuing. They have not stopped. So despite the fact of these words from Keir Starmer, despite the fact of words from David Lammy, despite the fact that Britain has joined France in saying that if nothing happens by September, they will officially recognize the state of Palestine, what are they actually doing to stop the starvation? What are they doing to stop the genocide? They, in this last week, have continued intelligence gathering flights from British Air Force bases in Cyprus, carrying out reconnaissance flights across Gaza. They maintain all the trade relations they have. They have not put sanctions on Netanyahu and other senior members of the military. They have sanctioned a couple of politicians that they keep labeling as far right and extreme, like Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, who are indeed far right and extreme. But these two are not a fringe. These two, the statements, the genocidal statements these two have made have been on behalf of a government as government ministers. And yet the UK government has just sanctioned them in an individual capacity. So all of these things tell you that these are not real. These are not a real change in policy. So we need to explore perhaps why the UK government is taking this step of raising its rhetoric at this time, whilst not actually doing anything substantially to end the killing, murder, and starvation of the people of Gaza.
And I want to expand on that exact point, the why in this conversation. Do you think Keir Starmer and the Labour Party as a whole is being pushed into this by public pressure? I know you touched on it a bit, especially from within its own ranks, and most importantly, civil society in Britain itself.
Yeah, I think there are two or three factors driving it. One is public pressure within the UK. One is political pressure within Parliament, and the third is what you might call a moral pressure. Britain, perhaps more than the United States, but Britain and Europe, certainly, Britain and France, certainly more than the United States, they pretend to believe in international law. They pretend to believe in international human rights. And Starmer, more than others, being a former international human rights lawyer who led the prosecution about genocide in the Hague against Serbian war criminals. So in this regard, they have this pretense that they have to uphold, and they're doing a pretty bad job of it. I mean, Britain does believe in the International Court of Justice and the International Criminal Court, unlike the United States that doesn't support them. And yet Britain has, to this date, not supported their judgments in respect to Palestine and Gaza. So they have to do a bare minimum to maintain this moral facade, as well as dealing with increasing pressure within the parliament, as well as, I think, being a state that supports the Zionist entity. I think they genuinely believe that the actions that the government of Netanyahu are taking damage the long-term prospects of the Zionist entity. I think they believe that if they can restrain them from their most extreme actions at this time, it's the best guarantee of the occupation going forward. That is a genuine split and division amongst international Zionists, whether Starmer or Trump or others in the world. The more extreme ones are happy for the genocide to continue. The less extreme ones, who actually probably have a little bit more political wisdom, realize that the Israel making itself a pariah state in the eyes of the world is not helping the long-term project to be sustained. So I think there's an element of that. But you know, Britain can't go beyond a certain point with the Zionist entity for two or three reasons. One is there is a political lobby which is quite strong, and it penetrates all the main political parties in the UK. Just to give you one example, David Lammy, the UK Foreign Secretary, has been, like many people, associated with the so-called Labour Friends of Israel for many years. Just in November last year, he spoke alongside, November 2023, he spoke alongside the hideous Israeli ambassador to the UK, Zippy Hotolovi, at the annual dinner. The current spokesman for Netanyahu, David Mensa, was a former director of Labour Friends of Israel, and he was once Lammy's campaign manager when David Lammy was thinking about running for mayor of London. So they have a personal relationship. But aside from the lobby, the UK actually has quite a few vulnerabilities. Over the years, Israel has managed to insert itself into the UK's tech capability. So the UK's digital infrastructure is very much, Israel has embedded itself into that. So it finds itself in a very vulnerable position. A few years ago, we had a government that was proposing to allow the Chinese company Huawei to build 5G infrastructure here. And people said this is a security disaster if they allowed China to do that just on the 5G infrastructure. Well, actually, Israeli companies, tech firms operating in the UK contribute about £1 billion to the UK economy and 16,000 jobs in cybersecurity. And this cooperation has been going on for a number of years now. So there are security vulnerabilities for Britain, which it has brought upon itself by allowing the Zionist entity to insert itself politically, digitally, in so many different ways into UK society.
Mm, mm. I'd like to segue a bit on our core topic. Well, from our core topic, because this announcement from Keir Starmer comes in the backdrop of those high-level conference talks on the two-state solution in the UN, and you also touched on it a bit that the UK government says this will be a move of maximum impact for the two-state solution. Let's talk about the two-state solution a bit. The conversations around it, especially those conversations happening at a high-level conference in the UN. Is it still a plausible solution? Is it still something that we can aspire to when we discuss Israel-Palestine relations, especially after October the 7th and this genocide that has engulfed the whole conversation?
The two-state solution has never been a plausible solution. And as the decades have continued, the two-state solution has become a less and less plausible solution. It's actually the carrot that Western powers dangle in front of pro-Palestine people every now and then to make them feel that if they stay engaged with the West on this issue, somehow, some way in the future, the West will back justice for the Palestinians. But just look at what a two-state solution would deliver. It would deliver a state of Palestine that exists on probably 20% or less of historic Palestine. That 20% would be divided between the West Bank and Gaza. That 20% would be utterly demilitarized. The Palestinian state would uniquely be a state that has no military and no permission to have military. The Palestinian state in the West Bank area would be this archipelago, this balkanized area of small islands within the West Bank that are surrounded by Zionist settlers. Because that's what the West Bank currently looks like. Well, the West Bank is not one continuous area. This two-state solution would be a state that is surrounded by its enemy and occupier and oppressor. This two-state solution would not allow the historic right of return of Palestinian families evicted from Palestine to go back to their homes, which are in currently occupied Israel. And a substantial amount of the Israeli political class and public believe that Arab Israelis, so-called Arab Israelis, those Palestinians that remained in 1948 in the areas that were occupied, those people should probably be expelled and sent to this new Palestinian state. So that is the solution that is on the table at the moment. It is not a solution. It really didn't surprise me that when we around the world see figures of images of starving children and hungry people being shot at food delivery points, it really didn't surprise me that Macron and Starmer start this red herring of a two-state solution just to try and keep people engaged. What somewhat surprises me and disappoints me is that some figures in the Palestinian Authority start welcoming this as some moral gesture that has great weight coming from Britain, who originally started this problem with their promise in the Balfour Declaration in 1917. So for me, when I hear them speak about the two-state solution, I see that they're taking people's eyes off the starvation in front of them, off the genocide, and onto some false political solution, which is really not going to serve the people of Palestine today, tomorrow, or any time in the future. Look back at this rhetoric about two-state solutions. You'll always see that the one that scuppers any progress in this is the Zionist entity, because frankly, they know it's not going to happen, and they just pursue with their own plans of expansion, regardless of this. And as we know, as even the mainstream media have reported, without America on board, without Trump on board, it's all rhetoric. Trump announced his plans back in his first term, the Abraham Accords, the idea being that we get better relationships with all the Arab states and the Zionist entity, and the Palestinians will just have to accept what's on the table afterwards. This is no solution. We should not be duped again and again and again by talk about this as a solution.
And that's very, very important to note because from a South African context, when you look at a two-state solution, it would have looked like a creation of Bantustans. They call them Bantustans here in South Africa, where it's just little pockets of land far away from any kind of resources, not allowed to have a military, and surrounded by settlers, by occupiers, essentially. And it's very, very important to note that if it wasn't allowed to happen here in South Africa, why would it be allowed to happen in Palestine? I want to talk about something interesting that Keir Starmer mentioned, the issue of timing. The deadline, for Israel is in September. I think it coincides with the UN General Assembly. Why then? And what happens if Israel simply ignores this threat, as it most probably will?
I mean, if Britain and France and others recognize a state of Palestine, it will mean a few things in terms of the Palestinian Authority getting a better seat at the table within these countries, rather than having some vague diplomatic representation. They would be recognized as states. But you don't need to be recognized as a state for your people to supposedly have protection in the current international law as it is. So all these things that people talk about, that, oh, but if you're recognized as a sovereign state, then it gives you some protections in law. Well, shouldn't people have protection in law? Shouldn't the people that exist there now have protection from the genocide that they have been suffering for the last 22 months? I think people like Starmer and Macron, they know that this is a window they can use just to exert pressure. Probably it's more targeted at trying to encourage the Trump administration to restrain their poodle in the region, their attack dog in the region. That it's not so much, I think, that anything dramatic is going to happen in September. There will be a UN General Assembly. There will be talk about Gaza and Palestine. The Western world knows this is happening on its watch. It is the dominant power in the world. America, Britain, Europe, Germany, and their allies are the dominant powers in the world. And yet they are presiding over a genocide, which they said never again to, presiding over a genocide live streamed on our phones. And they can't really control what we see in the way that they could before. They have to be seen to be doing something. These are the gestures. We need to keep exposing what they're not doing. They're not stopping the flights. They're not stopping manufacturing parts for planes which are sold to Israel to kill Palestinian women and children. They are not stopping the trade deals that exist already. They talk about halting future trade negotiations. They haven't stopped any of the previous ones. They haven't sanctioned the senior politicians. Israeli military figures come to Britain for training. They haven't stopped that. So we need to keep exposing what they're not doing, instead of really like letting them grandstand and show the world. And strangely, I think it's interesting that Starmer's comments this week haven't really hit the mark amongst ordinary people in Britain. I think a lot of people are really shocked at the language he used as well, the arrogance with which Britain says, we will recognize the state of Palestine, but only if these conditions are met. I mean, there's a lot of people have said, well, where's the logic in this? Either you recognize there should be a state of Palestine and you recognize it, or you don't. What is putting this condition on some third party for this for? So I think a lot of people have found this strange. So it's almost like if they were doing these gestures 20 years ago, they might have had some impact, but they're not having the impact they once were.
And that's very, very important to note. Dr. Abdul Wahid, always a pleasure. Really appreciate you giving us the time this morning and giving us that fresh perspective from the UK. We're going to leave it here for now. That was Dr. Abdul Wahid, UK-based political commentator, unpacking what could be a pivotal moment in global conversation around Palestine, or maybe not. The UK's threat to recognize a Palestinian state might sound powerful, but whether it's a real foreign policy pivot or just clever messaging ahead of the UN General Assembly remains to be seen. And as always, we'll keep watching how words translate into action, because thus far they haven't. As you've heard there from Dr. Abdul Wahid, no kind of tangible action has been taken by the UK government. Business as usual when it comes to trade, when it comes to military exercises and collaborations with Israel. And yeah, we'll continue to see. Maybe not celebrate the move, but take it with a bit of what do I say? A pinch of salt. You're listening to News and Views on Salam Media. Stay with us. We've got more coming up after the break.